Now, there's been clashes, violent clashes between migrants and South African residents in townships and densely populated areas here in Joburg over the last few weeks and months. First of all, we've seen the main operation taking place under the banner of Operation Dudula. Then this week, we saw the Alex Dudula movement clashing with migrant residents. Now, those two movements are not to be confused as the same thing. Now, the organizers of both of those are claiming that illegal foreigners are making the country lawless. You can imagine the reaction from foreign nationals to this. Well, let's try and get some reaction and hopefully a way forward in a dialogue with African Diaspora Forum Chair Vusumuzi Sibanda. Vusumuzi, good morning to you. Thanks very much for your time. First of all, before we talk about any kind of solution, any kind of dialogue that should happen, what have you made about the violence and the clashes that you've seen the past few weeks?
Look, it's good morning. It's a very, 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 very bad, situation, and it's very sad because we see people that are all, basic low-income earners, or people that are not really earning, that are suffering right at the bottom of, the poverty datum line, fighting against each other because of the resources. And this should not be the case, because it also means, it implies by these actions that, South Africa, does not have, rule of law, particularly when people decide to take the law into their own hands and take the work of people, departments that is properly designated to them, and make it their own work and begin to attack other people, just the way that we have seen. So this is not good at all. And to really say that the fault is on migrants because they are taking, South African jobs, without really, any information from the Department of Labor, for example, which is supposed to arrest those things are happening, those employers.
Because there's a number of issues that could be leading to the violence we're seeing in these protests. I think perhaps top of that list, tell me if you agree with me, Vusumuzi, is the unemployment rate in this country, the failure of government, and if you ask government, the failure of the private sector to create more jobs. It comes down to a job resource issue, and that squarely must fall on the shoulders of government. Would you agree?
I completely agree with you that, the unemployment levels are very high, and that falls squarely, on the table of, the government. And that is their responsibility to stimulate the economy and ensure that the private sector is creating, jobs.
And then as far as law enforcement is concerned, we're busy watching the visuals now. I'm not sure if you're able to see them, of the protests going, of both operations at the moment as well. Law enforcement in this. Many people are criticizing the police, they're criticizing security forces for their lack of protecting the foreigners in this. We're seeing the police standing with those carrying South African flags, but the criticism is the police are not being equal in their protection. Is that fair?
Well, I don't think it's completely fair. Look, if we look at Operation Dudula, for example, what we saw happening in Hillbrow, we have seen the police, being on the scene toe-to-toe. And as a result, for example, we know there were attacks in Barra and Rosettenville. And sometimes because maybe the information gets a bit late to the police, maybe because of the intelligence or people reporting, but because the right to protest is a right that is entrenched, in the South African Constitution. And as a result, but what we know is that at any stage where such protest action has been reported, we have seen police come to the scene and really ensure that, there are no such clashes like what we saw happening in Orange Grove. So yes, we have seen police intervene in a very, impressive way, to the extent that we have had people from Operation Dudula saying they are protecting foreigners by making sure that those clashes don't take place. Of course, like what happened in Alexander, I'm assuming that that was too late, the response, either because the information or intelligence from the police did not get to them, in time. And we would be very happy if those perpetrators, and what we're actually praying for is that now, if people that are in a protest march, they've got leaders, and there is something bad that happens, leaders must be taken to task because they should be responsible for their groups.
Just before I say goodbye to you, Vusumuzi, from the African diaspora view, despite the violence, which should never be happening, is there a part of this argument that South African residents should be given job priority over foreign nationals? Is there any part of that argument that makes sense to you?
Well, look, frankly speaking, I think in terms of, South African citizens deserve, priority, especially when you talk about, ordinary, because if foreigners come into South Africa and they've got a work permit, it has got to be given or issued in terms of the Immigration Act and the Labour Act, which must stipulate how they are given these. But once they are admitted, then they should not be, exposed to further, discrimination. So indeed, yes, there is a priority that should be given to South African nationals, to work. But this does not mean that once people are legally admitted into the country, they should be further, subjected to further, a discrimination like what we see happening at this stage when we have people that have documents and people are being told they must leave the country. South Africa must be completely closed to foreigners while these people are properly admitted into the country.
Vusumuzi Sibanda, African Diaspora Forum Chair, appreciate your time as always joining us here on eNCA in the South African Morning. If you ever wanted a visual and a visceral view of the unemployment issue in our country, we've been experiencing that over the past few weeks. So the violence and the protests spilling out onto our streets. The question is, what is government's response? And if you ask government, as I said, they're going to ask, what is the public sector's response? There's no easy answer to this, but we're going to stay on top of it for you here on eNCA.